Yes, begin please.
Yeah. Namaskar. Welcome to episode 21 of Satyagraha series. In this series, we try to bring forth the environmental and societal issues that impacts us or that has a potential to impact us in future. In this particular session, we are trying to expand our horizon. We will discuss about the exploitation of an underprivileged community by a privileged community such as ours. The persecution and exploitation that is happening since the beginning of the civilization. Now, before proceeding, I would like to formulate the issues so that we can have a productive discussion later on. Now, we all need food for energy and survival. After it has served its purpose, the undigested part has to be removed out of our system. And I believe we all have toilets at our places to relieve ourselves. Now, what happens when you have relieved yourself and press that flush button? Now, according to my research, if I talk about India, there are three scenarios that are presently happening in India. And that somehow depends on the location which you belong to. If you belong from a good city that has good infrastructure, that has an underground sewage network, so that waste, the mixture of waste and water, it moves through those underground network pipes, the sewage network, and it enters into the sewage treatment plant to treat the waste, which is the right methodology considering the environmental impact of the waste. The second scenario. Now, if you belong to a city that doesn't have an underground sewage network, then the household or residents of that city, they might have installed the septage tanks or the pit latrines at the convenient location. A pit latrine is nothing, it's like a storage vessel. So basically you excrete, it gets accumulated, and after a certain height, the waste has to be removed out. Similarly, septage tank, it's also like a storage vessel, but it has an outflow. So when it gets into a certain height, so the outflow it enters into an open nala or drain. And the third part is the open defecation, which is another issue in itself, which we will discuss on some other day. Now, how do we remove the waste from these pit latrines and septic tank or open nalas? So either we can have used machines. They are sucker tanks that is a kind of a pump system that removes the sucks the waste out of this system, or that opens up the choke nalas. But you will be surprised to know that in 21st century, even after 73 years of independence, we still, most of the parts of India still rely on manual scavenging. There is a human being like you and I. He enters into these pits. He immerses himself into these pits and removes the waste with his own hands with the help of a shovel or a basket. Now, to discuss the same, like why this the people this are even in 21st century the people are engaged in such activity. Why the government is not doing anything? We have the eminent two of our eminent panelists. We have Mr. Kanthi Swaroop. Mr. Kanthi Swaroop is a PhD candidate at Center for Policy Studies, IIT Bombay, and he has done some extensive research. He's currently undergoing a research on the linkage between waste, caste, infrastructure, and the environment, particularly focusing on sewage and sewage works of Hyderabad. We also have with us Miss Priyanka Preet. Priyanka Preet is currently the law student at Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia National Law University, and she has written for some eminent tabloids like Economic and Political Weekly, the Outlook magazine, and she has also written for a book, Health Laws, which will be published by Thomson Reuters, South Asia later on. Also, I believe Dr. Shiva Shankar, who's a visiting faculty of IIT Bombay, will join us later on. I think he has joined us, Dr. Shiva Shankar.
I have. Thank you.
Uh, thank you, Dr. Shiva Shankar, for joining us. And thank you, Mr. Kanthi and Priyanka ji, for taking out time uh, for enlightening us about this topic. Now, before proceeding ahead, Dr. Shiva Shankar, I would like to ask you a question. So basically, I had been following you. I am the part of the group where you share some informative articles on manual scavenging. I think you're also quite vocal about it. So I would like you to please introduce yourself a little bit for our viewers, and also what motivates you to engage to be vocal about the manual scavenging.
All right. I think manual scavenging is an unparalleled crime, and it's a complete and violent abuse of human rights. And that is why all these government acts and amendment of 2020, they cannot solve it because they see it not as a human rights problem, but as some engineering problem. Oh, they'll buy robots, they'll do this, that, and even the people who uh, are concerned about this, because I mean, there is no need to elaborate on the fact that it's a completely a completely shameful thing that happens in this country, huh? So these acts think it's a engineering problem, you know, and you should have robots or this or that or some, like it goes on. You have to mechanize it. Uh, you have to increase salaries. There's all this talk. It's important, of course, but the primary problem is the violation of human rights. All right, it's because this government and this society and the entire lot of us is unable to see which comes first, that we are unable to solve it. If we consider it as a serious violation of human rights, in fact, it falls under the category of genocide by the Genocide Convention. Uh, if we see it as a genocide that is being perpetrated, then our focus would be on solving that human rights problem. As a consequence of it, the engineering problems will be solved, will have to be solved, etc. You know, after all, like for instance, uh, women usually go around collecting shit from open toilets and pits and all that, right? In Mofussil towns, villages, and so on and so forth. Okay, what this society has to do, or we, some of us, we have to actually liberate them. It's against the law, first of all. We have to make it a movement that we just provide them an alternative job. All right. The first thing should be to liberate people who are doing scavenging, manual scavenging. Now, people will immediately say, okay, but then who will clean the shit? I say, you clean your own shit. After all, this woman was scooping up shit from 20 households into a basket, as you said, huh? And walk to some place outside the village or this or that, some pit, some open place, okay, and dump it, right? You carry your own shit there and dump it. Each man, woman, and beast is responsible for his, her, or its own shit. So you just liberate people from this job. Immediately, fellows will start laying sewage lines, this, that, and it'll become a priority. You see, it is actually the consequence of a far greater crime, namely the abuse of human rights. That is what you have to solve. And the law guarantees you this, solution that it's against the law to do manual scavenging. It has to be implemented by whom? By civil society. There's nobody else who's going to do it.
Dr.
This
Shiva,
is
you I think yeah.
sorry. So
I'm
this is
sorry.
my solution, and Kanthi and I, in fact, have written an article about it.
Right, right.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Shiva, you're very right that a waste is a user's responsibility. When you're saying that, okay, we are the waste generator and we have to clean our own mess. So waste is our responsibility. But I want to know like what happened, like where we went wrong. Because we don't believe that waste is our responsibility. We think that our waste is some other's responsibility. So what happened in some history part or in a real past that we started believing that okay, once it is out of our system, it is out of our home, it is not our responsibility, it's the other person's responsibility. So
Yeah. This is a,
I would
yeah. Sorry. Please. Sorry.
uh,
Yeah. Go on.
so I want to know your viewpoint on that. Like what happened in the past.
Yeah. Well, not just cleaning waste, everything is ordained by caste, isn't it? Not just this activity, every activity. For instance, there was a caste whose job it was to carry the palanquin. Okay. So if you were born in that caste, that's what you had to do. Doesn't matter whether you could sing well or you could, make out the stars or anything else. Your job was to carry the palanquin. It is actually the worst way to organize a society. You know, the best way is, oh, each person has some talent, some interest, etc., and to nurture it, right? Like given, equal respect for everything, I would have been a gardener. I've planted groves of trees wherever I've worked. You know, I'm doing I'm in the wrong job really. I'd rather be a gardener. But in a society where Mali is like OBC, so everything has been, uh, you know, it's at every
Caste.
level, right? So some people have to deal with impure things, and of course, shit is impure. So it's part of, you know, I mean, it happens. It's happened everywhere. I mean, Kanthi is more of an expert. Like in France, I read, there was this tribe of people who went around with pigs. You know, I mean, you were essentially born into it, and you were considered like sort of outcast, perhaps. And you went around ringing a bell with this brood of pigs, you and your, family, and your job was to clean toilets. I suppose the pigs ate much of it. Okay, so but that's long gone. You see, the remarkable thing about, for instance, Christianity in Europe, okay? I mean, a son, the eldest son or a daughter of a poor family sort of became a monk because, church provided free food, there was
Right.
learning there, etc. It was a, break from poverty. So the Christian church, I mean, in Europe, in spite of, its label of being conservative, was actually somewhat, it had this impulse, this democratic impulse, because a large body of, priests and nuns who came from, economically lower strata. Not in India, not in Hinduism. It's the same elite that could become priests
Mm.
and they brood. And it's at everything, every level, right? You missed out on Ekalavya. I mean, that's why I spit on Arjuna awards. Let me make it clear. Call it Ekalavya award. And what Drona award? I mean, I'd be ashamed if somebody ever gave me something called Drona award. I mean, as a teacher, I've tried to be the very opposite of Drona, of course. So, of course, it's tied up. I mean, it doesn't happen everywhere. People have built themselves good drainage systems, good sewerage systems. They've understood, of course, the connection between sanitation and health and the well being of everybody involved. And of course, like people, when they come from civilized places like Cuba or Netherlands, they're shocked. People with their hands doing all this, cleaning shit. And we talk about, civilization, want to be in the Security Council and so on and so forth. I mean, you don't even have a country going.
So basically, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you. Hello.
No, no, I was afraid I was talking too much.
नहीं, नहीं. So you're saying basically if we talk about a casteism, the caste system, which has been introduced in our mythology, which has helped based shaping up our present society, is somehow responsible for this exploitation of an particular class. So Kanthi ji, I want to know from you, like, do you know, like, what why a particular community assigned this task? Like, is there any version of it is mentioned in the history? Like, why a particular community has to do this task? Why not every waste generator has to do this task?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, first of all, thanks for this event, and Ankit and Sandeepji and others, part of Satyagraha, and happy to share the platform with Shiva, whom I like, and Priyanka, nice to meet you. So, yeah, these questions are important, Ankit. In fact, these are relevant, even current, because see, I mean, sanitation, or for example, in the Indian society, or any sort of injustices, or any sort of perpetuation of violence, apart from other categories that dominate, I mean, discriminations like gender, class, and other aging. So, caste is something which is profoundly visible, and it operates, and it is inextricably linked basically with every occupation. Sometimes it is difficult to call what is occupation, and so sometimes many of these things are kind of enslavements, and manual scavenging is one such kind of a thing. In fact, the term indicates more recent manual scavenging, because the scavenging we see largely in the food chain, so animal kingdom. And manual scavenging is something, I mean, the word itself is derogatory, to apply to particular community, scavenging and manual scavenging. See, it has, I mean, so caste has played a decisive role, so there is no doubt in that. But because in the representation of sanitation work, I mean, this has been the trend for 2 millennia in the subcontinent. And it begins with the prescription of sweeping and dealing with, ordure to chandals, the paradigmatic untouchables in most of the Sanskrit literature, and also are referred as despised social groups in much of the normative Brahminical texts, and some of the early Buddhist literature. So this has been the case. So Shiva also rightly pointed out in terms of the nexus between pure and impure. But and the function, the basic function of the caste operates on the basis of touch, untouchability and touch, and whom are allowed to touch what, and what is allowed to touch. And this forms the basis for the functioning of caste. And sanitation work is precisely something is so is manifested on the basis of what is being touched and who should touch this, and what is the place of this, and what is the place of the other. And it is not just the physical appearances and the look how it is understood, but also the perseverance in terms of other senses like smell. You will understand something is bad when it starts reeking, or when it is start malodorous so smells. So, and it eventually generates some sort of repulsive behavior, and that repulsiveness created a repulsiveness creates an opportunity, for dominant sections to get distance from that particular matter and to mobilize somebody to do it. This is not something new, and this is, also a little bit problematic to put this way. But in our hierarchy itself, there are distinctions on the basis of where you emerged. And Chandals emerged from something, which is seen as filthy in the feet or food. Obviously, some things were by de facto given to them as part of duties. And later on, due to the cultural invasion, many, there are Muslims and other nations which conquered different parts of the country, and different cultures has been started. And different defecation practices also came into exist. And one such defecation practice is defecating in a particular place than going somewhere else. And this is not something, again, not something to go against with the practice of scavenging. Scavenging has been there, but human scavenging, animal, taking out the animal carcasses or dealing with all the discarded matter in a particular location. But later it shifted from that particular issue also to the particularly to manage the defecated places, and how do you maintain it. And the advent of colonial empire, so it much started because in a large scale they introduced Latrines, and partly it has to do with the Indian national movement. The Indian national movement was against of this urbanization processes. So they were romanticizing villages, that we'll get back to the villages, and that was also seen as a cause for much of the Britishers not to deploy more sewage and sanitation services. And it has been well discussed by many scholars and historians. So these created, enough evidence and enough, substrate for the continuation of manual scavenging and sewage work, and so making much of the women, as the victims of this process. And later on, when manholes and septic tanks became the sites of sewage and sanitation discharges. So they became also the sites of committing, so man itself is a crime, but so when you go into the septic tank, as Shiva was mentioning, as genocidal violence, of course, you can see it. The practice itself is that, but at the same time, so there is no guarantee that you come out when you enter into the septic tank. Such is the case, so it is largely, it's an intersection of many things, so violence, humiliation, atrocity, enslavement, and many other things. I'll stop here, but you will carry off. We'll take off. Resume or discussion later.
Kanthi, one more question. When you're saying that after independence movement, when our society is being shaped, so we have started this movement, go back to villages. And then that movement moved, I think, after independence, two thoughts were quite I would say, paradoxical. One was the Gandhi viewpoint, and one was Ambedkar's viewpoint, which is also quite relevant because it also tells us the frame of reference. Like Gandhiji was from a higher caste, and how he perceives the lower caste. Like he used to, if I'm not wrong, he used the word bhangi for the people who are engaged in these activities. And he was of the point that, okay, these people are very dear to my heart because they help us reach a higher sense of purpose or purity. And if in next birth, I want to be a bhangi. And so basically, if I'm not wrong, he's tried to patronize the word, the bhangi, the community and the word. While Ambedkar was completely opposite to this viewpoint. He was the view that, okay, this viewpoint is quite destructive for the community as a whole. So I want you to quite explain the two different viewpoints on this manual scavenging.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is very much well debated. In fact, from the discussions, if you follow Gandhi versus Ambedkar or Ambedkar versus Gandhi and Ambedkar, even in the contemporary discussions, and you will find the contrasting views, and which are this needs to be discussed from the sanitation perspective. Not much has been written, but it has been discussed. But you see, first of all, in most of our locations, the regions, so nobody calls sanitation worker. Now we are calling sanitation workers, but in the local areas, so it is very much vernacular. To call a sanitation worker is very rare. People use their caste names, and they have their own names. For example, as you are pointing out, Gandhi insisted of, in fact, he writes in this Harijan, one of his translated version on on ideal Bangi, he repeatedly used it, and he uses the term despite the community opposed. Despite the opposition from the community. Before going to that point, it is interesting to see the discussion of sanitation in India. It's always constructed and always spoken from a particular person. So Gandhi model of sanitation, Ambedkar idea of sanitation, Bejwada Wilson sanitation, or Brindeshwar Patak, one more person who takes the Gandhian approach. Also, even right now, Narendra Modi, who did, so glorifying the sanitation work in his recent, not recent, Kumbh Mela visit to Varanasi. So it has been always with person. So, but most in cases, the debate surrounds Gandhian idea of sanitation, because Gandhi advocated something else. But what he did was, Gandhi said, so the Bangi is needed for a society. And he says, like mother washes her baby, like a nurse house patient, and Bangi is that way important for the society. But this in this analogy, what he misses is, mother doesn't only wash, mother also teaches kid to do something, and nurse treating somebody when the person is incapacitated, not when the person is active. So to put it bluntly, without any profound analysis, it is something that, so postponing what has to be done, and why this practice, postponing the issue of the sanitation labor, people from the sanitation labor caste, by showing all these ideal things. And second thing is, Gandhi also said about if there is next birth, I would like to take birth in this community and to liberate these people, which is a problematic, because he wants the system to continue till he reborns, and he himself wants to liberate them. And why can't he do in his current birth is a question, if he wants to do at all. And second thing is, Ambedkar has a very sharp view on this issue. So what Ambedkar says, Ambedkar completely says it's, so we all know that. So in Indian community, a person is not, a sanitation worker is not because of merit or something else, but because of one's own birth and one's own social location. And you can relate it with any sanitation worker, because somebody is sanitation worker because there is a particular history associated with that person, why particular person became a sanitation worker. And this history predominates even today in deploying sanitation workers, in choosing sanitation workers, in recruiting sanitation workers. So what Ambedkar also said is, just leave this work. To call what Bangi, Jadu, Chodo, and that those kind of slogans were also there. But he was also objectionable against using these terms. Using the caste terms, because it essentializes the link. And even in the Swachh Bharat, when Delhi government introduced those machines, manual, they started precisely from the Valmiki Basti in the Delhi. showing, so the kind of link between the community and the sanitation and the waste, and such that they can't escape from this. And you tend to see from that own particular point of view that they are all, because even in the community, not many of them, even if many of them don't do the sanitation work, in the popular imagination, the community itself is, relegated to doing sanitation work. If, for example, if there are 100 people and 50 are doing sanitation work and 50 are not doing, but since you are calling them by their name, everybody is a sanitation worker. So this is a very problematic discourse the national leader has given to us. Yeah, shall I stop here?
Yeah, thank you, Kanthi. Next question I have for Miss Priyanka. Miss Priyanka, I want to know, like, okay, we have around 70. We are independence. We got independence in 1947, and it has been 73 years since we have got independence. Is there any law which has been made to protect this exploitation? Has Supreme Court has taken cognizance of this exploitation and made some ruling and stuff? So I want to know about the legal course, what has happened legally for their protection, for the protection of their rights and protection of their dignity.
Firstly, thank you for inviting me here. I can only say that I'm here only to share my academic reading and research, and I'm not here to appropriate the voices of Dalits or Adivasis who are involved in this dehumanizing practice. So that is the first thing, which I would say. As far as the laws and policies are concerned, my problem begins with them when these policies are formed in a very blind and neutral manner. So obviously you have the Prohibition of Manual Scavenging Act of 2013, which completely outlaws manual scavenging. You also have the Safai Karamchari's judgment by the Supreme Court, which again comes down heavily on manual scavenging as a practice. Apart from that, you have already in place the Prevention of Atrocities Act, the SCST Act, commonly known as the SCST Act, which obviously again prohibits manual scavenging. So, and you already have Article 14, 17, 21. I mean, I can go on and on about how, various Supreme Court judgments are there. I mean, the Bandhua Mukti Morcha judgment, which talks about how there should be dignity and the health of the health of any worker or labor should be kept in mind while carrying on any profession or occupation. So there are a plethora of laws. The fact that this practice continues now makes us wonder why it is happening. So I'd rather tell you why. The reason is that when I ask you, imagine a manual scavenger, you would probably imagine a man coming out of a sewage system who is covered in filth. We never imagine women. And yet, 98% of manual scavenging is done by women in this country. So there begins the problem that you are not addressing women in these acts. Second, what happens is that the act outlaws manual scavenging, and yet within the same legislation what they're saying is that we will provide protective gears. Now, in my interpretation as a law student, I would say that if you're prohibiting and banning a particular act, how are you talking about providing protective gear while it happens? It's outlawed, simply it's banned. So I have had my professor who's disagreed with this interpretation of mine, but this is how I see it. The second thing is, in the act itself, you will notice that it authorizes the railways to, to hire manual scavengers. They are, in fact, the people who work with the railways in clearing out the waste or sewage or even the feces are not considered manual scavengers. So there lies the problem. So I was in fact reading this speech by the MP of DMK, Ms. Kani Mozi. So she says that the railway itself hires 95,000 manual scavengers. So if that is the case, then how can we go ahead and outlaw it? Further, there's another issue that you will see. The United Nations Human Rights Watch report will say that there are 1.2 million manual scavengers in India, right? But um, if I refer to the Ministry of Social Justice's data, the report of 2017 and 18, it says there are 50,000 manual scavengers. So there you see that there's a vast difference there's a discrepancy. It almost seems as if there is no willingness on behalf of the government, on behalf of the civil society, to actually realize and identify who is doing the practice, and therefore we should begin the practice of rehabilitating them. So the first, when you notice the act, it says first identify uh, the people who are indulging in this practice and then help them out. But this task of identification has been left incomplete, has not even begun, I would say. So, your acts will not help you in that aspect till the time there is a huge, like, I think Shiva Shankar ji said that, unless there is a huge compulsion within ourselves that, we recognize this practice that is going on. And why it becomes even more necessary right now is that the health of these women who are involved in this practice, um, we think, yes, there are heart headaches, frequent headaches, rashes, there are various health issues, cardiovascular diseases which are caused. There are even cancer to some extent can be caused because of this practice. What we do not realize is that pregnant women are carrying on these practices right now, and there is no solution, and their reproductive organs are vulnerable right now while they're doing this practice, while they're carrying on this practice, and there seems to be no solution. And I think you'd asked also that, how do we take them out of this? Why are they carrying it? To that, I would say, I would give you an example. So you have the Garima Abhiyan, which is doing some wonderful work in this area. It is helping women who are involved in this practice. And what they say is that there was a woman who tried to start her own shop, and she sort of thought that she'll get out of this practice, she'll remain in the same village, but she'll open a shop. People refused to buy commodities and goods from her. They said that because she was a manual scavenger earlier, she is filthy. So she remains filthy, so her goods become filthy. So there's no point of buying anything from her. So this is how women are trapped in that cycle of poverty. So I know that there are several judgments. I mean, like I said, I could go on about the acts, I could go on about how Article 14 talks about equality. But when there is no recognition of who is doing what, when there's no specific policy to address the needs of those people who are doing this practice the most, who are being compelled to do this practice the most, we see no solution.
Right. Thank you, Priyanka ji. I think you have also covered the deplorable state of women in manual scavenging. You mentioned that 98% of women are engaged in this activity, and still there's I think the thing is not visible, because even when I was searching about the topic, there was always a man who was coming out of the pit, completely immersed in shit and coming out of the pit. But the woman, the thing is somehow missing in the text part also. So
In that, I would say that I'll just say that there are multiple battles that every person fights. In that sense, a female manual scavenger is fighting three different battles. One is obviously of caste, one is of being a woman, the third is of complete, you could say, a lack of identity, a lack of identification, inconspicuousness, because people don't even know. So how do we address? So there are three battles that you can see here.
and you brought out an important point, a stigma which is attached to that person. Like say if a person is engaged in this activity, of course he's like covered in shit, he's unhealthy. That stigma is there, okay, that one should not greet this person or touch this person because you can catch this disease. But I think with time the stigma remained with us, and presently if a person even is not engaged in this activity, that stigma still remained. And that's how we came into this category of untouchable. I want to know, like, how from Dr. Shiva Shankar, like, how can we remove this stigma from our mind, like a general public? How can they remove this stigma?
Yes, well, everybody should read Baba Sahib Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste, of course, where the blueprint, I mean, it's of uh, as great importance to Ambedkarites as the Communist Manifesto is to communists. Um, See, what I mean to say is it's rather futile um, to wait for the society to reform itself, etc. I mean, what about today? This is really a crime that tomorrow nobody does it. And there are laws, as Priyanka said, there are laws and laws and laws, and the government itself is violating it. So that's why I said it's only a subset of people. Of course, all these so many organizations, Safai Karamchari Andolan, etc., they've been doing heroic work, but the rest of us have to join in larger and larger numbers. That's what it means. You see, you need a social and a cultural revolution where large numbers get involved. All right, if I was suggesting to T-Star Setalwad that there should be a campaign like the Citizens for Justice and Peace is conducting in Assam. Barefoot lawyers, you might say, paralegal teams, okay, from the people who are affected, who are going around, who have been trained how to fill out forms, how to pursue this matter, that matter. So, people have to go. They have to go to a place where there's manual scavenging going on. And as Priyanka said, no, you don't set up a grocery store in the same village. You relocate. Surely, see, the intent is not there, she said. I mean, the government, civil society, nobody, I mean, it's like a big joke, really, that's being a cruel joke that's being perpetrated. So, there has to be larger participation, like we should fund, we should contribute, towards a team, to teams of people. First in a few places, and then you replicate it. The success of paralegal teams who will go and register a case. Look, here there is a case of manual scavenging. All right. And then people who will help this person, push through what the government has promised. And till then, provide refuge. Some kind of, come along. I mean, you think this country cannot imagine how to provide employment for, 1.5 million people, 3 million people, 10 million people? It's rather pathetic, is it not? That
Right.
we cannot organize such a thing. Surely doable. I mean, that's what it means to be a nation state or a civilization or whatever, right?
Hmm.
That, people get together and solve problems. A list of problems is large, but then you prioritize it. Just like in a family. I never told my kids, hey, we have to buy a TV, so why don't you skip school this year? So every family has a list of priorities, right? Every nation, state, or civilization should have a list of priorities, has a list of priorities. This civilization, is like completely like absurdly and criminally unique, that it thinks that, living in clean and healthy surroundings for everybody is not a priority. So we have to, do this kind of thing. Larger and larger numbers, touchables. I mean, after all, uh, Dalits themselves are divided by caste. At the very bottom of this, pit are the so-called scavenging castes. There are 7 scavenging castes in Tamil Nadu. And, certain castes like halal khors, I think, have split, Hindu and Muslim. There used to be, in a family, one son will be Muslim, but now lines are getting hardened. So I'm nobody to really, suggest any kind of solution. But I'm saying this is the problem. The problem is a human rights one. And to solve it, we have to support Beswara Wilson and so many, many others who have collected a lot of information, who have been litigating, who have been fighting, etc., etc. We have to join forces because finally, you see, we are the criminals, no?
Hmm.
I think Priyanka, she used the word rehabilitation. I prefer not to use that word. It's us criminals who have to be rehabilitated. People who have been involved or who have ever been involved in this manual scavenging, they have to be provided justice. We have to be rehabilitated enough to arrive at a point to understand the genocidal nature of this crime.
Right. So basically, the privileged. Yeah.
If I may add to the point raised by Shivaji, that like he's saying that there are campaigns now. There have been several ad campaigns by the government over decades, and we somehow seem to remember a lot. For instance, we had Amir Khan for Kuposhan Bharat Chodo, and then we had Madhuri Dixit for open defecation. So these taglines have somehow stuck to us. They are there in our memories. So there's a lot that we as a civil society can do and the government can do by raising awareness, because understand that when you decentralize the entire process and try to solve it, the panchayats themselves are very sexist. They are very casteist in nature, so they themselves might not be willing to solve the problem. So it is the civil society groups like sir said that we have Mr. Bezwada Wilson working. We have other NGOs working. There needs to be a pan India ad campaign as well, because there is something which goes down in our memory that this is something wrong which is happening. So as far as awareness is concerned, a lot can be done, and this is just one mechanism that I am suggesting right now.
Right. Thank you, Priyanka ji. We have only 10 minutes left. So I want to put an important question. See, I think we still in this session, we are still unable to undefine the definition of manual scavenger. See, how it is different from a waste collector. Like a person comes to my home, he picks out the waste, and if we're not wrong, in a slum area, there's always a dump yard where people put waste, and there's always a human excreta involved. So what is the line between a waste collector and manual scavenging? How can we define these two?
I'm
Either
sorry,
similar?
sorry, please continue.
Yeah. So are they coming to the same definition? They enjoy they have equal laws to protect them, or they are two different groups? So I want to ask this question.
Sorry, may I just say, I think it's a technical word, manual scavenging, as opposed to just scavenging. If you go to Wikipedia, it will tell you that manual scavenging, as opposed to scavenging, is the activity that makes you come in contact with human excreta.
Right,
That's the
right.
definition of it.
But
So
as far as the law is concerned, the two definitions would the two terms would differ. It differs how is that your municipal corporations, they hire safai karamcharis. Now they are proper government employees. They have access to various social security schemes like pensions, a proper salary. They even sometimes have, not sometimes, they generally, I would say, would have some sort of access, a proper employer they can go to for, protective gear. So they are not really coming in touch with execreta, but off the record, they might. Again, there are stories. Now, here in manual scavenging, what happens is that the government hires the manual scavengers on a temporary contractual basis. So let's say a woman, works for, let's say, 20 days, 1 month, while, in clearing the excreta from a particular pit, right? And she's given her whatever, poor wages she's given. She's not getting access to any social security measure, let's say, maternity benefit. And the reason I raise this point, Ankit, right now in this scenario is because during this pandemic, what has happened is that it's the manual scavengers who are, and both the Safai Karamcharis, who are coming in contact with infected gloves, infected syringes, infected masks, and we think that the doctors and nurses are the only frontliners. They are not. It's these two communities as well, these two people, sort of people who are being forced to carry on this practice. They do not have access to, a mask or a sanitizer or soap, so that they can at least wash their hands. So you understand that their vulnerability increases greatly. For instance, we have news that in Delhi, Safai Karamcharis were being forced to clear, the houses, clean the houses of those people who were COVID positive, but they did not have any access to any protective gear. So they are the frontliners that we do not know about or talk about, and therefore they lack access. The government does not, as of now, have any policy, immediate policy, that we need to dispense certain protective gears to these people. So that is one lacuna. So that's why we need to be very careful with the terms as well.
Okay, so these are different terms. A Safai Karamchari is different and a manual scavenger is different.
Yes.
Even a Safai Karamchari, if he comes in touch, contact with a human excreta, he won't be included in the category of manual scavenger.
That they are some Safai Karamcharis ideally know with the excreta, to be really honest, as per the law. But if Safai Karamcharis are being made to do it, and there are instances where they do it, they're not in a position to really bargain or complain. So that is the poverty, cycle that is compelling them to be quiet about it.
Okay. Thank you, Priyanka ji. Also, see, we have only 5 minutes left. So I would like to invite Dr. Sandeep Pandey, who is a Ramon Magsaysay Award winner, to share his views on manual scavenging. Doctor, sir, you're on mute.
Yeah. No, I don't have anything to add to what has already been said, except that I raise this question at every possible platform, that when we have such sophisticated technology that you can perform surgery without opening human body, then why don't we have machines, to clean these drains and septic tanks? And why does a live individual have to enter, these septic tanks and sewer lines and do manual scavenging? And apparently there is machinery available, but you remember there was an accident in Vadodara, I think a year or two back, and then um, Amitabh Bachchan and Mahindra, they said they will provide so many machines. So I fail to understand why we cannot completely, get rid of this practice by replacing it with machines. And I think here I would agree with the viewpoint of my friend Professor Shankar, that it has more to do with caste, because people sitting in policy making decisions are mostly upper caste people. So just as by the way, India and Nepal, among all the South Asian countries, have the lowest percentage of access to sanitation. So and these two countries are, as you know, Hindu dominated countries. So it is because of the caste system that people sitting in policy making positions, they think that why the poor, or who are mostly Dalit in our country. My IAS officer friend Amod Kumar says that 90% of the poor in India are Dalit, and he also says that 90% of the Dalit are poor. So I think the whole mindset is that what is the need of providing toilets to the poor and the Dalits? They can go and defecate in open. And the same mindset, I think, applies here, that what is the need to invest money in the machines if the human beings can do? So So that is the only comment I have to make. This is something which we can get rid of, this practice, but we are not doing it deliberately, just as we are not implementing common school system in this country.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandeep. Basically, I want to conclude it with a question only. See, we have our Prime Minister has introduced this Swachh Bharat mission to prevent the damages because of open defecation. So, is Swachh Bharat mission is responsible to improve the life and the situation on the ground, or is it just more like a marketing or a promotional kind of a thing? So I would request anyone from the panelists to answer this question.
Well, I mean, so also let me connect this with your previous question, sanitation workers and manual scavengers and the differences. You see in the Indian construct, I mean, the sanitation is not something which is, it's not just sanitation as sanitation. I mean, sanitation is, mediated in infrastructure. Here it's not just, it is broken. Sanitation infrastructure, there are no connections. And most of the matter that is discarded, whether the domestic waste, household, or commercial waste, whatever the waste, it contains to that extent, the bodily ejaculations and also human excreta. Every sanitation worker daily rounds, I mean, irrespective of their categories, they come in contact with that waste. By definition, manual scavenger is somebody who contacts human excreta and not having, so safety gear. But in general, every sanitation worker in India contacts this and becomes a manual scavenger. But this is something which needs to be acknowledged and has to be presented. Arguably one of the most unnoticed things that happens in the sanitation front. And second thing about, I mean, there are many things, but I just skip that other part and just jump on to Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. As I said, sanitation, there is also something called sanitation cycle, more technically speaking. So, so collection to processing, and there are different steps that involves waste recycling and transport, containment, many other stuff. So this Swachh Bharat Abhiyan providing latrines, community latrines and pits, septic tanks also. But the point is the quantity, in proportionate with the amount of the waste is generated. So where do you go and process it? So we need fecal sludge treatment plants for every safe disposal of the waste. Now in our country, so how many FSTM plants were available? That is the biggest question. Because if these pits needs to be cleaned, and also responding to Dr. Sandeep's an interesting question about mechanization and technology. I mean, these are things which are visible and very much visibly appearing that we lack these things. But at the bottom, it is something which is to be done with the seamless infrastructure, which takes, first of all, I mean, we need something called a kind of a consciousness how you practice sanitation and how you adopt a sanitation culture. And these things will also come not just because of somebody enforcing you, and it is more to do with your own conscious understanding of sanitation, as Shiva also indicating about this is the society that has to be rehabilitated. Rehabilitated doesn't mean, so inculcating sanitation practices towards more egalitarian sanitation practices. So here the FSTM, I mean, when in the absence of a fecal sludge treatment plants, so where do this collected refuse from the individual, latrines will be deposited? And now they are depositing in the private septic tank cleaners everywhere across provincial towns, cities, and everywhere. So they go and dispose in the barren lands or in the night in a deserted place. So because I mean there are other complex problems for this, but for everything there has to be something in connection. We can't ask something isolated. We need something, a proper, a link to everything, and there has to be a link, and that link should be, sustainable link. And you can't break something, you can't break something, and you can't ask for something, and it has to be a particular pattern, only on a pattern, so you understand the sanitation practice. I mean, a better sanitation practice.
Thank you, Kanthi ji. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this discussion and enlightening us. So, in the end, I would like to conclude for the suggestions we discussed in today's session. So, basically, the issue is with the stigma. There are laws to protect the manual scavenger, but there's stigma inside us which has to be removed. It can be removed only by us. So like we have a concept which is from which which brought us together, which is towards a better world. The small changes we take in our life to make a big impact. And in today's session I realized that the small change we have to bring in ourselves to respect another human being, no matter we consider him below us or above us. We have to respect a human as a human. And also, if you talk about rehabilitation, so rehabilitation is not to the victim, it's the rehabilitation of the culprit, rehabilitation of the mind, rehabilitation of the thought, which we should consider. And lastly, I think as individuals, we also need to mobilize other people. We also need to see that the other people, they treat they treat the waste collector, the scavengers with respect. And if anywhere the law is being broken, we should report that. So in this on this note, I think we can end this session. We had a productive session. So thank you, Dr. Shiva. Thank you, Dr. Sandeep Pandey. Thank you, Priyanka ji, and thank you, Kanthi ji.
Thank you, Ankit. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
I have to just make one last comment, Ankit, on the suggestions that you were making.
Right.
I think you are very right. When I was a graduate student in the United States, I remember that the person who would come to collect garbage from my office, he used to come in the night. I think he was doing some other job in the day or something like that. So first of all, he will come in his car. Owning a car in United States is not a big deal. But what is more important is that he will come with all protective gear and everything. And more importantly, he will because it was night time, so I was also free and he was also not in a hurry. So he would sit down in my office and would have political discussions on the kind of democratic system we have in India. And then I would make a tea and offer it to him. So you are right, we have to treat anybody as equal. That is the basic point. And in the Indian context, that means we have to dismantle the caste system, because most of the this discrimination which is practiced by us, consciously or unconsciously. For example, all the people who come into our homes as domestic help, whether to clean or to cook or to, I mean, in how many middle class households are they allowed to share our dining tables and sofas? Even if they are given something to eat, they will go and eat it in some corner. So this is the kind of mindset, because of which we have this problem in India. We don't treat human beings equally. So I'm glad that you summed it up correctly. Thank you.
Sorry, Ankit, do I have 1 minute to tell an interesting story?
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
please.
Yeah, Shiva. Yeah.
Okay, so you see, Newton was born in 1642, all right? But his father died while he was still in his mother's womb. I'm talking about Sir Isaac Newton,
Mm-hmm.
the greatest scientist who has ever lived.
Yeah.
Okay, so his father died while he was still in his mother's womb, so he never saw his father. And in a few years, his mother married again. Okay, so that's one lesson there. and in 1642. Well, he was born 1642, so let's say 1644. And she married, a rich guy, a hunting and riding kind of chap who didn't want the young Newton around. All right. So he was sent off to some uncle's house, Isaac, the young Isaac Newton, to be brought up there because, his foster father didn't want him around. But because his uncle was a priest, there was the Bible and there was some Latin and so on and so forth, and Newton got to see books, etc. I mean, if he had grown up with his mother, he'd have ended up a hunting and riding sort of chap, all right? So, but as a result, he didn't have very much money. His uncle was not very well to do, a priest. So when Newton went to Cambridge, he could not afford, to live there. He needed to work to help manage. So you know what he did? He emptied chamber pots. See, we are talking about 1660 something. There's no sewerage system in London or in Cambridge. So he emptied chamber pots. Of course, the rich guys didn't do it, and Newton wouldn't have done it if he could afford not to. But you see, the thing is that he went on to become Sir Isaac Newton.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Shiva, for sharing that. I didn't know about that.
Thank you, Shivaji.
Yeah.
Good night, all.